and welcome to the Hope, Despair, and Memory, Lesson 4. Hope, Despair, and Memory, Analyzing Words and Phrases. In the previous lesson, we learned how an author conveys the central idea of a text. Today, we will read Hope, Despair, and Memory by Elie Wiesel. We will also annotate the text and discuss how an author develops a claim. You will need your copy of Hope, Despair, and Memory posted in this lesson, the annotation guide posted in this lesson, the link to dictionary.com or thesaurus.com also posted in this lesson, and your reading response journal page posted in this lesson. Listen as I read aloud paragraphs 1 through 4 of Hope, Despair, and Memory by Elie Wiesel. As I read, boldface the words you do not know. So I'm now going to read the paragraphs, and then we're going to work on the rest of the activity. Elie Wiesel, Nobel Lecture, December 11th, 1986, Hope, Despair, and Memory. A Hasidic legend tells us that the great Rabbi Baal Shem Tov, the master of the good name, also known as the Besht, undertook an urgent and perilous mission to hasten the coming of the Messiah. The Jewish people, all humanity, were suffering too much, beset by too many evils. They had to be saved, and swiftly. For having tried to meddle with history, the Besht was punished, banished along with his faithful servant to a distant island. In despair, the servant implored his master to exercise his mysterious powers in order to bring them both home. "Impossible," the Besht replied. "My powers have been taken from me." "Then please say a prayer, recite a litany, work a miracle." "Impossible," the master replied. "I have forgotten everything." They both fell to weeping. Suddenly the master turned to his servant and asked, "Remind me of a prayer, any prayer." "If only I could," said the servant. "I too have forgotten everything." "Everything? Absolutely everything?" "Yes, except what?" "Except the alphabet." At that the Besht cried out joyfully, "Then what are you waiting for? Begin reciting the alphabet, and I shall repeat after you." And together the two exiled men began to recite, at first in whispers, then more loudly, Aleph, Beth, Gimel, Daleth, and again and over again, each time more vigorously, more fervently, until ultimately the Besht regained his powers, having regained his memory. I love this story, for it illustrates the messianic expectation, which remains my own, and the importance of friendship to man's ability to transcend his condition. I love it most of all because it emphasizes the mystical power of memory. Without memory, our existence would be barren and opaque, like a prison cell into which no light penetrates, like a tomb which rejects the living. Memory saved the Besht, and if anything can, it is memory that will save humanity. For me, hope without memory is like memory without hope. Just as man cannot live without dreams, he cannot live without hope. If dreams reflect the past, hope summons the future. Does this mean that our future can be built on a rejection of the past? Surely such a choice is not necessary. The two are not incompatible. The opposite of the past is not the future, but the absence of future. The opposite of the future is not the past, but the absence of past. The loss of one is equivalent to the sacrifice of the other. So now we're going to continue back on that other slide. If you'll notice, there are two other directions on the slide. You're going to annotate your copy of Hope to Spare in memory, and you're going to use the annotation guide on page 1 of your handout to determine your annotation steps. Now remember that annotation is not just highlighting and underlining. Annotation is a record of your thoughts and impressions as you read. So we're going to look at the annotation guide, and we're going to look on the steps and in just a minute. But before we do, I want to stress one more thing. I'm going to be guiding you through these steps in the next few slides to help you focus on analyzing multiple elements in one section at a time. The denotative meanings, the connotative meanings, and the rhetorical appeals. This will help you develop a process for analyzing complex text, which you can apply to other text you will read in this unit and in other units. So let's look at the annotation guide. So if you look at page 1, it says, listen as your teacher reads paragraphs 1 through 4 of Hope to Spare in memory. Highlight the words you don't know green. I also want you to place them in bold. And then step 1 is to use dictionary.com to choose a synonym for the underlined words. You're going to use insert comment to type a synonym for each word and make sure that you're using the appropriate part of speech. We're going to go through these steps, and then I'm going to break them down a little bit further. Step 2, what is Wiesel arguing? You're going to highlight any claims that he makes in this passage, yellow. Then in step 3, you're going to determine the meanings of the words and phrases with figurative or connotative meanings. What patterns emerge? You're going to highlight these patterns orange and note the effects of these words and phrases by using insert and comment. How does Wiesel develop his argument? And step 4, label his development of ethical, logical, and emotional claims, ethos, pathos, and logos. You're going to use insert and comment to do so. So I'm going to go through and kind of guide you through a little bit of each one of these. So we're going to go to thesaurus.com, and we're going to look up the first word that is underlined. So if you notice, the first word that is underlined is actually the second word of the whole speech, and that is Hasidic. So what we're going to do is we're going to double click on it. Well, we're going to double click on it to highlight it. Then we're going to go over to dictionary.com, and this time I think we actually need to use dictionary.com because of the fact that it is a proper adjective. And we're going to type in the word Hasidic and see what comes up. So it says a member of a sect founded in Poland in the 18th century by Baal Shem Tov and characterized by its emphasis on mysticism, prayer, ritual strictness, religious zeal, and joy. So I noticed the word Hebrew, and I know Hebrew and Judaism are the same, are tied together. So what I'm going to say is that it is a spiritual Jewish group. A spiritual Jewish group. So when I go back to my copy, I've already got it highlighted. I'm going to go to Insert and Comment. And in the comment that comes up, I'm going to type Spiritual Jewish Group. And you're going to do that with the other word that is in this paragraph, and it's the only other word that's underlined in this section, the word rabbi. So when I turn you loose to work on this, you're going to do that first. Now, the next thing you're going to focus in on is highlighting the claims yellow. So I saw something very interesting after he told the story. And it's near the bottom of the third paragraph. It says, if anything can, it is memory that will save humanity. For me, hope without memory is like memory without hope. And so I'm going to again kind of click and drag to select it. And I'm going to go over here. You have the B, the I, the U, the A, and then you have what looks like a paintbrush, and that's the highlight color. I'm going to click on that because that's basically his claim for this section. And I'm going to highlight it yellow. Now you don't really have to worry about another claim. But we're going to move on to step 3. Now in step 3, let's go back and look at step 3 again. Step 3 is asking us to determine the meanings of words and phrases with figurative and connotative meanings and seeing what patterns emerge. So we're going to highlight these patterns orange and note the effects of these words and phrases by using insert and comment. So let's look at paragraph 2 because I noticed that there was something quite interesting in paragraph 2. See, I noticed that we have more vigorously and more fervently. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight that entire phrase set orange. I'm going to color it orange, doing the same thing as I just did. And basically the use of these words emphasizes how dedicated the Besht was to learning and remembering. So I'm going to go ahead and do insert comment again. You're going to have a lot of insert comments when this is done. It's almost like having sticky notes with notes attached. I'm going to say words emphasize how dedicated the Besht was to learning and remembering. And again, I'm always going to click comment so that it sticks. It's kind of like slapping that sticky note down on the page. Now, you actually don't have another one for this section, but we are going to be working with other sections. But if you'll actually try to find a few more, because I think you'll be surprised. And then step 4 is pointing out ethos, logos, and pathos. So if we look at the opening itself is proof of his I'm going to go ahead and start with Besht and actually I'll just go ahead and highlight the words paragraph 1 because I'll know then that it's tied to what I'm about to say. Basically, I'm going to go to insert comment. And this is an example, telling this story within a religious allusion, a religious story, lends to his credibility. So it's actually an example of ethos. Religious allusion leads to credibility. Now, the reason that I'm going through all of this with you, and I'm going to give you a few minutes to do some more with part 3 and some more with step 3 and step 1 on your own. But when we get to the next section of paragraphs, you're going to do this on your own. You're going to go through each step and try to find examples. So I'm going to give you about 4 or 5 minutes to annotate for step 1 with the other word, the word rabbi. And then I'm going to and also in that time, you need to see if you can find any more that would be included in step 3. So I'm going to give about 4 or 5 minutes for you to do so. So this slide should look very similar to the previous slide because the only thing that changes is the paragraph numbers. So I want you to listen as I read aloud paragraphs 5 through 8 of Hope, Despair, and Memory by Elie Wiesel. As I read, boldface the words you do not know. You're actually going to boldface them and put them in green. Then I'm going to give you some time to annotate your copy of Hope, Despair, and Memory, and to use the annotation guide to determine your annotation steps. Those steps 1 through 4 again. So I'm going to go ahead and read the passage, and then you're going to have about 14 minutes to do your annotations. A recollection. The time after the war. The place, Paris. A young man struggles to readjust to life. His mother, his father, his small sister are gone. He is alone, on the verge of despair, and yet he does not give up. On the contrary, he strives to find a place among the living. He acquires a new language. He makes a few friends who, like himself, believe that the memory of evil will serve as a shield against evil, that the memory of death will serve as a shield against death. This he must believe in order to go on, for he has just returned from a universe where God, betrayed by his creatures, covered his face in order not to see. Mankind, jewel of his creation, had succeeded in building an inverted Tower of Babel, reaching not toward heaven, but toward an anti-heaven, there to create a parallel society, a new creation with its own princes and gods, laws and principles, jailers and prisoners, a world where the past no longer counted, no longer meant anything. Stripped of possessions, all human ties severed, the prisoners found themselves in a social and cultural void. Forget, they were told, forget where you came from, forget who you were. Only the present matters. But the present was only a blink of the Lord's eye. The Almighty himself was a slaughterer. It was he who decided who would live and who would die, who would be tortured and who would be rewarded. Night after night, seemingly endless processions vanished into the flames, lighting up the sky. Fear dominated the universe. Indeed, this was another universe. The very laws of nature had been transformed. Children looked like old men whimpered like children. Men and women from every corner of Europe were suddenly reduced to nameless and faceless creatures, desperate for the same ration of bread or soup, dreading the same end. Even their silence was the same, for it resounded with the memory of those who were gone. Life in this accursed universe was so distorted, so unnatural that a new species had evolved. Walking among the dead, one wondered if one was still alive. And yet real despair only seized us later, afterwards, as we emerged from the nightmare and began to search for meaning. All those doctors of law or medicine or theology, all those lovers of art and poetry, of Bach and Goethe, who coldly, deliberately ordered the massacres and participated in them. What did their metamorphosis signify? Could anything explain their loss of ethical, cultural, and religious memory? How could we ever understand the passivity of the onlookers and, yes, the silence of the allies? And question of questions, where was God in all this? It seemed as impossible to conceive of Auschwitz with God as to conceive of Auschwitz without God. Therefore, everything had to be reassessed because everything had changed. With one stroke, mankind's achievements seemed to have been erased. Was Auschwitz a consequence or an aberration of civilization? All we know is that Auschwitz called the civilization into question, as it called into question everything that had preceded Auschwitz. Scientific abstraction, social and economic contention, nationalism, xenophobia, religious fanaticism, racism, mass hysteria, all found their ultimate expression in Auschwitz. So now I want you to go ahead and work on your annotations. You're going to complete steps 1 through 4 on the annotation guide for paragraphs 5 through 8, and you're going to have about 14 minutes to do so. Now I want you to listen as I read aloud paragraphs 9 through 13 of Hope, Despair, and Memory by Elie Wiesel. As I read, remember to bold and highlight in green the words you do not know. You're going to annotate your copy of Hope, Despair, and Memory by using the annotation guide on page 1 of your handout to determine your annotation steps. Once I finish reading, you will have about 14 minutes to complete steps 1 through 4 on your annotation guide for paragraphs 9 through 13. The next question had to be, why go on? If memory continually brought us back to this, why build a home? Why bring children into a world in which God and man betrayed their trust in one another? Of course, we could try to forget the past. Why not? It's not natural for a human being to repress what causes him pain, what causes him shame. Like the body, memory protects its wounds. When day breaks after a sleepless night, one's ghost must withdraw. The dead are ordered back to their graves. But for the first time in history, we could not bury our dead. We bear their graves within ourselves. For us, forgetting was never an option. Remembering is a noble and necessary act. The call of memory, the call to memory, reaches us from the very dawn of history. No commandment figures so frequently, so insistently in the Bible. It is incumbent upon us to remember the good we have received and the evil we have suffered. New Year's Day, Rosh Hashanah, is also called Yom HaZikaron, the Day of Memory. On that day, the day of universal judgment, man appeals to God to remember. Our salvation depends on it. If God wishes to remember all suffering, all will be well. If he refuses, all will be lost. Thus, the rejection of memory becomes a divine curse, one that would doom us to repeat past disasters, past wars. Nothing provokes so much horror and opposition within the Jewish tradition as war. Our abhorrence to war is reflected in the paucity of our literature of warfare. After all, God created the Torah to do away with iniquity, to do away with war. Warriors fare poorly in the Talmud. Judas Maccabeus is not even mentioned. Bar Kochba is cited, but negatively. David, a great warrior and conqueror, is not permitted to build the temple. It is his son Solomon, a man of peace, who constructs God's dwelling place. Of course, some wars have been necessary or inevitable, but none was ever regarded as holy. For us, a holy war is a contradiction in terms. War dehumanizes, war diminishes, war debases all those who wage it. The Talmud says, Talmidei Hukanimim Shemarbim Shalom Baolam. It is a wise man who will bring about peace. Perhaps because wise men remember best. So now I want you to work through steps 1 through 4 on page 1 of your annotation guide for paragraphs 9 through 13. And as I mentioned earlier, you will have 14 minutes to complete this part. I want you to answer the following in your reading response journal. What is Rizal saying about memory in the first 13 paragraphs of Hope, Despair, and Memory? You will have about 8 minutes to complete this section. If you do not finish this, and if you did not finish the annotation guide steps for paragraphs 1 through 13, those will be for homework. But I'm going to go ahead and close out this lesson. Congratulations! You have completed Lesson 4 of the Hope, Despair, and Memory unit. In this lesson, you learned how to annotate a text to further understanding of how an author uses words and phrases to convey an idea. You also learned the importance of memory in overcoming social injustices.